There's a cute story of a chicken and a pig who saw a sign in front of a church that said, "Feed the hungry." The chicken said, "That's a good idea. Let's help by putting in our widow's mite. Let's give them ham and eggs." The pig says, "That's easy for you to say. But for me, that is a total commitment." Today's gospel and first reading, we hear daring acts of total commitment. We hear the story of two widows. Widows at that time were people who were especially vulnerable. There was no social services or networks of support. They were completely dependent on others because when their husband died, the money went to the son or the nearest male relative. And if they didn't take the women in, they were left destitute. That's why the prophets speak about caring for the widows and the orphans, because they're the most vulnerable of that society. The woman in the first reading is in desperation. She's a widow with a son, and there's a famine, and she's alone. And she's down to her last meal. She's as low can be. And the divine comes to her through the prophet, as the divine always comes when we are as low can be. He always comes. And in this case, the prophet asks for a drink of water from her, asks her to give him something. We've heard this before. When Jesus goes to the well, and there's the woman, the outcast, who's a woman, who's a Samaritan, and who's had many husbands and is considered an adulterer, and she's an outcast. So she goes to the well in the heat of the day when no one's around. And Jesus comes to her in her outcastness, and he asks her for something. He asks her for a drink of water, to give him something. Why? In the first reading, Elijah intensifies the request. He asks for more than water. He says, "Please bring me a bit of bread." And she says, "Well, it'll be my last meal. I'll give it to you and then I'll die." And Elijah doesn't say, "Oh, well, don't give it to me then. Keep it." He lets her give it to him. Why? When you give from deep within yourself, you have aligned yourself to the one who is pure giving. And in doing so, you are now free to receive from him. You're free to receive more than you could ever possibly give. And then you're given the power to give and to give and to give. And it never runs out because you're linked to the one who is pure gift. The result for the widow and her son is that the jar of flour did not go empty. The jug of oil did not go dry. The result of the woman at the well is Jesus says, "You give me something to drink, and you will receive waters bubbling up to eternal life. You will receive the waters of eternal life in response. So much more than you could possibly give will be given to you. To get this, friends, is to get the Bible. It's to get faith. It's to get discipleship. If you want life, give life to another. If you want to grow in faith, pass on your faith. Evangelize. St. Francis and all the saints got this. His famous prayer is, Lord, make me an instrument. With his hatred, let me just bring love to it. With his injury, let me bring pardon. With his doubt, let me bring faith to them. With despair, let me bear hope. Grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled, but to console, to be understood, to be patted on the back and have my ego stroked. No, let me understand the other and be with them. Let me not so much be loved, but let me love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is when we die to ourselves that we're born to eternal life. You know the poor widow in the gospel? She gave her last 2 coins. She gave all she had. Now, she could have rationalized not giving, and no one here would have condemned her. I mean, she could say, you know, that temple, it's pretty corrupt anyway. They got a lot of money, and I need this. See, we can rationalize not giving. You know, the Catholic Church, it's got some big problems. I'm not going to be too invested in my Catholicism. You know, St. Norbert's, there's things here I like, there's things I don't like. So I'll just kind of keep my distance. I go to church on Sunday sometimes, but I'm not going to become part of a faith community. You know those people in need, the poor people? A lot of them are just ungrateful anyway. You know, my neighbors, I should reach out to them, but you know, they got some difficult personalities. Kind of self-centered. So why should I bother? You know, I have my own family, and I'll just take care of that. I have my needs to focus on. You know, you could say that in every case there's some truth in that, but the response is not gospel. It's not gospel. In these readings, we see 2 widows with daring acts of trust and faith. There's even folly here. I mean, these widows are given the last thing they have, their last bit of food, their last 2 cents. It doesn't really make sense to give that away. Nobody does that. But when you encounter Jesus Christ, you personally encounter the manifestation of God's pure gift to us. It empowers you to give. All of it. For such is the power of God's giving in Jesus, that it gives us the power to give ourselves. there's also another folly. It's the folly of God. For Paul says, he did not deem equality with God something to be grasped at, but he emptied himself and became one of us. You know, the people at the time of the early church, the religions, the people, they sneered at that. They sneered at this proclamation of faith in a God who would empty God's self and become a human. The people said, God doesn't do that. That's foolish. Oh, and by the way, he died? That's silly. God doesn't die. This foolishness of God is God's wisdom for us, given in Jesus. That we might be fools too, like these women. You know, when I was preparing this homily, I found this gospel rather challenging, so I asked a good friend of mine, my wife Helen, you know, Helen, what do you think of this gospel of the widow's mite? And she goes, oh, I love that gospel. I'm like, you love it? Why? And she said this, because she is in 100%. She is in 100%. That's it. And may our journey bring us to 100%.